The crystalline spires of Etherian Prime caught the light of 3 suns, refracting it into colors that had no names in human languages. Queen Lysandra stood at the observation deck of the royal palace, her fingers pressed against the transparent aluminum viewport, watching the daily ballet of cargo ships and diplomatic vessels weaving through the orbital traffic patterns. 23 Earth years. She had stopped converting to Velari time cycles because the numbers made the absence feel even longer. "Your Majesty, you're doing it again," Chancellor Torvin said from somewhere behind her. His voice carried that particular tone of affectionate exasperation he reserved for when she was being, as he put it, dramatically melancholic. "Doing what?" Lysandra didn't turn around. "Staring wistfully into space like you're the protagonist of a tragic opera. The court is starting to talk. Again." She heard him pouring something, probably that awful fermented beverage he'd become addicted to after the trade delegation from the Outer Rings visited last season. "They think you're going to declare another day of mourning. And honestly, the economic impact of closing the markets for sentiment is something my budget can't handle right now. My daughter has been missing for over 2 decades, Torvin." "I'm aware. I was there when she left, remember. I helped plan the expedition route. I also helped plan the 7 search missions we sent after her." He moved to stand beside her, and she caught the scent of that terrible drink. "She's gone, Lysandra, the sooner you accept." "Don't finish that sentence if you value your position." "My position has survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 coups, and your decision to wear that catastrophic crown to the Galactic Summit. I think I'll manage." He took a sip of his drink, made a face that suggested immediate regret, and continued anyway. "I'm saying this as your friend, not your chancellor. Kalith wouldn't want you frozen in this moment." "She'd want you to." The alert chimed. Not the gentle notification sound for scheduled arrivals, but the sharp, insistent tone that meant something was wrong. Lysandra's hand went instinctively to the communication panel embedded in the viewport's frame. "Unidentified vessel approaching Royal Docking Bay," the security coordinator's voice crackled through. "Configuration unknown, not responding to hails. Shields appear to be malfunctioning. No, wait. The ship doesn't have shields. Repeat, vessel has no defensive capabilities. It's broadcasting a diplomatic code, but it's ancient, 23 years out of date." Lysandra felt something shift in her chest. The Velari had many abilities that other species considered supernatural. Minor telepathy, enhanced empathy, the capacity to sense the emotional resonance of places and people. But the strongest gift, the one that ran truest in the royal bloodline, was the familial bond. A connection that transcended distance and time, a thread that tied parent to child across the vastness of space. She felt that thread now vibrating like a plucked string. "Stand down," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Majesty," the coordinator asked. "I said stand down. Let the ship dock." Lysandra was already moving toward the door, her formal robe swirling around her like liquid starlight. Torvin scrambled to follow, still clutching his drink. "Lysandra, wait. You can't just— this could be anything. A trap, a rogue vessel, some idiot who stole old codes." "It's her. You can't possibly know that." But she did know. She knew it in the same way she knew the suns would rise, in the same way she knew her own heartbeat. The familiarity of it was almost painful, like touching something frozen after years in warmth. The Royal Docking Bay was in controlled chaos when they arrived. Guards had formed a perimeter around the landing platform, their weapons charged but not raised. Protocol dictated caution, but Lysandra's presence demanded restraint. The ship itself was a peculiar thing, definitely Velari in its basic structure, but modified with components she didn't recognize. Panels had been replaced with materials that looked almost primitive by their standards. One of the stabilizers appeared to be held on with some kind of adhesive compound. "That's either very impressive or very concerning repair work," Torvin muttered. "Possibly both." The airlock hissed. Steam vented from the seals, obscuring the doorway. Lysandra felt her heart hammering against her ribs in a way that seemed undignified for a queen but entirely appropriate for a mother. The guards tensed. Somewhere behind her, she heard Torvin set down his drink and move closer, his hand probably on whatever small weapon he carried for emergencies. A figure emerged from the steam. Caliph looked older, but not in the way time usually carved its passage. Her face held experiences rather than years, laugh lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wore clothing that was a strange hybrid of Velari design and something else, something more practical, less ceremonial. Her long ears, the mark of their people, were adorned with small metal rings that definitely weren't traditional Velari jewelry. But it wasn't Caliph that made Lysandra's breath catch. It was the two small hands clutching her daughters, one on each side. Children, two of them no more than 6 or 7 years old. A boy and a girl, staring wide-eyed at the enormous docking bay with expressions of pure wonder. They had their mother's elegant, elongated ears, unmistakably Velari. But their faces were rounder, their features softer. Their skin tone was something in between, a shade that spoke of genetic combination. The boy had dark curly hair that no Velari had ever grown. The girl's eyes were brown in a way that Velari eyes simply weren't. Half human. The realization hit Lysandra like a physical blow. "Hi, Mom," Caliph said, her voice carrying across the silent docking bay. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder near the Epsilon relay." The little boy tugged on Caliph's hand. "Mama, is this the palace? It's really shiny. Why is everything so shiny? Do they clean it every day? That seems like a lot of work." "Ethan, remember what we practiced. About not asking 17 questions the moment we arrive." "I only asked 5 questions." "It was 7, dummy," the girl said. "Myra, we talked about the name-calling too." Lysandra realized she was still standing frozen, her mouth slightly open in a way that was definitely not regal. Torvin, to his credit, recovered first. "Well," he said loudly, cheerfully, in a tone that suggested he was absolutely panicking internally but refusing to show it. "This is unexpected. Should I call for refreshments? I feel like this is a refreshments moment. Possibly also a very strong drink moment, but I've been told I rely on those too much." "Are these my grandchildren?" Lysandra heard herself ask. The question came out smaller than she intended, almost childlike in its hope and fear. Caliph's expression shifted, defiant, exhausted, determined, apologetic all at once. "Yes. Mom, these are my children, your grandchildren." She paused, then added with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, surprise. The throne room had never felt so small. Lysandra sat perfectly still in the seat of luminance, a chair carved from a single piece of star metal that had supposedly fallen from the sky during the first landing. Her advisors formed a semicircle around her, their expressions ranging from shock to outrage to the kind of bureaucratic concern that meant someone was already calculating political ramifications. Caliph stood in the center of the room with her children flanking her like small, fidgeting shields. Myra kept staring at the prismatic ceiling with her mouth open. Ethan had discovered that if he stomped his foot in just the right spot, the floor's bioluminescent panels would ripple outward in waves of blue light. He was currently on stomp number 47. "Ethan, please," Caliph said without looking down. "But it's so cool. Mama, can we get floors like this at home? We live in a 3-bedroom apartment in Seattle. We can barely afford regular floors." "What's Seattle?" one of the advisors whispered to another. "I believe it's a human settlement on Earth, the primitive world in Sector." "I can hear you," Caliph said, her voice sharp enough to cut the murmuring. "And Earth isn't primitive. They've split the atom, mapped their genome, and invented coffee, which is frankly more impressive than half the things we've accomplished." Chancellor Torvin, who had positioned himself near the back of the room with what Lysandra recognized as strategic cowardice, raised his hand slightly. "What's coffee?" "Liquid salvation. You'd love it. It's bitter and keeps you awake and makes you slightly irritable, so basically your personality in beverage form." Despite everything, Lysandra felt her lips twitch. Caliph had always been quick with words, quick with humor. It was one of the things that had made her such a promising diplomat before she vanished. Princess Caliph, High Advisor Sarath began, his voice dripping with the kind of formality that preceded bad news. While we are relieved at your return, you must understand the situation you have created. The Velari Genetic Preservation Act, ratified over 3,000 years ago, explicitly forbids. I know what it forbids, Sarath. I was there for the history lessons, all 800 hours of them. Caliph shifted her weight, and Lysandra noticed for the first time how tired her daughter looked. I'm not here to argue law. I'm here because these are my children, and I wanted them to meet their grandmother. The law exists for a reason, another advisor chimed in. Genetic purity has kept our people strong, has prevented. Has prevented what exactly? Progress, evolution, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we don't have all the answers. Caliph's voice rose, and Myra's hand found her mother's automatically. I've lived among humans for over 20 years. They're chaotic and short-lived, and they argue about everything. But they're also innovative and passionate, and they don't spend centuries debating whether it's acceptable to smile at someone from a different species. Mama's using her speech voice, Ethan whispered to his sister, still loud enough for everyone to hear. That means someone made her mad. The advisors made her mad, Myra whispered back. They have that effect on people, I can tell. Torvin made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Sarath looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. Lysandra finally spoke. Caliph, what happened? After the expedition, after you disappeared, where did you go? The room fell silent. Even Ethan stopped stomping. Caliph's shoulders sagged slightly. The ship malfunctioned near Earth's solar system. Something about their sun's radiation interfering with our quantum drives. The engineers would know better than me. I crashed in what they call the Pacific Northwest. Coastal region, mostly water, lots of trees. She smiled slightly at the memory. I would have died from exposure or starvation or any number of things I wasn't prepared for. But someone found me. The human, Sarath said, making it sound like an accusation. His name is James, Dr. James Rivera. He's an astrophysicist who was running a private SETI program out of his university. He'd been listening to signals from space for years, hoping for contact. Caliph's expression softened in a way that made Lysandra's heart ache. He found me instead, took me to his home, fed me, taught me English. Never once asked for anything in return. How romantic, Torvin said, in a first contact protocol violation sort of way. I tried to signal for help. For months I tried. But my communicator was damaged, and Earth's technology isn't advanced enough to boost a signal that far. And somewhere in all that trying, I realized I didn't want to leave anymore. Caliph looked directly at her mother. I fell in love, Mom. The kind of love that makes you understand why people write poetry and start wars and do incredibly stupid things. He made me laugh. He challenged me. He saw me as Caliph, not Princess Caliph, not the heir to some ancient bloodline, just me. And the children, Lysandra asked softly, were a surprise. Apparently Velari and human genetics are more compatible than anyone predicted. Myra came first, then Ethan 2 years later. Caliph pulled both children closer. They're brilliant. Myra can already read in 3 languages, and Ethan has an eidetic memory that puts most Velari scholars to shame. They're also half human, which means they eat constantly, ask questions about everything, and have absolutely no concept of personal space or royal dignity. I have dignity, Ethan protested. You tried to ride the cleaning drone this morning. It looked rideable. It was 6 inches tall. Lysandra found herself smiling despite the weight of everything else. She stood slowly, the star-metal throne humming slightly as she rose. The advisors shifted nervously. Protocol dictated that she remain seated during formal audiences, that she maintain the proper distance and authority. Protocol could wait. She descended the 3 steps from the throne platform and crossed the gleaming floor until she stood directly in front of her daughter. Up close, she could see the small scars on Calith's hands, probably from learning to navigate a human world. Could see the laugh lines, the confidence, the happiness that radiated from her despite the tension of the moment. "You've been happy," Lysandra said. "Yes. You chose to stay away." "Yes," Calith's voice wavered slightly. "I know what that cost you. What it cost everyone. But Mom, I couldn't come back without them, without him. And I knew what bringing them here would mean." Lysandra reached out and touched her daughter's face, the first physical contact in over 2 decades. Then she looked down at Myra and Ethan, who were watching with wide eyes. "Hello," she said to them. "I'm your grandmother." "You're really tall," Ethan said immediately. "Ethan," Calith hissed. "What she is, everyone here is tall. It's like a planet of basketball players." Torvin definitely laughed that time. The palace had just begun to settle into an uneasy truce when the alarm sounded again. Lysandra was in the private quarters with Calith and the children, watching Myra attempt to explain the concept of ice cream to a very confused servant, when Torvin burst through the door without knocking. "We have a problem," he announced. "Another one?" Calith asked. "Is it the High Council? Because I have a speech prepared about genetic diversity and hybrid vigor that's going to make Sarath's head explode. Worse, there's another human ship requesting permission to dock." The room went very quiet. Even Ethan stopped trying to activate the wall panels. "Another human ship," Lysandra repeated slowly. "How is that possible? Earth doesn't have faster-than-light capability." "Well, someone forgot to tell this particular human that, because he's here and he's demanding to speak with Princess Calith." Torvin pulled up a holographic display from his wrist comm. "The vessel is, well, calling it a vessel is generous. It's more like a cargo container with engines strapped to it. Our engineers are baffled that it survived the journey. One of them called it an insult to physics." Calith had gone pale. "Oh no, no, he didn't, he wouldn't, that's..." She looked at her children. "Did either of you tell your father where we were going?" Myra and Ethan exchanged glances. "Define tell," Ethan said carefully. "Ethan Marcus Rivera." "I might have mentioned it when he called last week," Myra said quickly. "But I didn't think he'd actually follow us. He said he understood why you needed to do this alone." "Your father," Calith said, pinching the bridge of her nose, "has a very flexible relationship with understanding, and an even more flexible relationship with his own mortality, apparently." "So this is the father," Lysandra said. She felt something twist in her chest, curiosity, apprehension, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Let him dock." "Your Majesty, with respect, we know nothing about this individual." Sarath's voice came through the room's comm system. He'd apparently been listening the entire time. "He could be dangerous, unstable. He's a university professor who studies radio waves and forgets to eat lunch," Calith interrupted. "The most dangerous thing about James is his complete inability to understand social cues and his tendency to ask inappropriate questions at formal events." "He sounds perfect for this family," Torvin muttered. 20 minutes later, they stood in the docking bay again. Lysandra had insisted on being present, despite the protests of her security detail. The ship, and she used the term loosely, looked like it had been assembled by someone who had seen pictures of spacecraft but never actually studied engineering. Parts of it were clearly human-made. Other parts looked suspiciously like Velari technology, probably salvaged from Calith's original crash site. The whole thing was held together with what appeared to be industrial welding and sheer determination. "That shouldn't fly," one of the guards said, awe in his voice. "That shouldn't exist," another added. The airlock opened with a grinding sound that made everyone wince. A figure stumbled out, fumbling with the helmet of an environmental suit that was at least 3 decades out of date by Earth standards and laughably primitive by Velari ones. When he finally got the helmet off, Lysandra got her first look at her daughter's chosen partner. He was thoroughly, unremarkably human. average height by their standards, which made him short compared to the Velari. Dark hair going gray at the temples. Brown skin several shades darker than the children's. He wore glasses, actual corrective lenses, because apparently Earth still hadn't perfected ocular surgery, and they were slightly crooked on his face. His clothes were rumpled and he had what looked like engine grease on his cheek. He also looked absolutely terrified. "Hi," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Then he cleared his throat and tried again. "Hello, I'm Dr. James Rivera. I'm looking for Caliph and Myra and Ethan. I'm there, I'm her." He seemed to realize he was babbling. "I'm here in peace." "Papa." Ethan broke from his mother's side and ran across the docking bay. James dropped to his knees and caught the boy in a hug that looked like it knocked the air out of both of them. "You followed us," Caliph said, walking over with Myra, who was trying very hard to look annoyed but failing. "James, you could have died. That ship is held together with salvaged parts and hope." "Mostly hope," James admitted, standing up with Ethan still clinging to him. "The quantum drive I rebuilt from your original ship kept failing. I had to restart it manually 17 times. Also, I'm pretty sure I violated at least 40 international space treaties and possibly invented 3 new crimes." He finally looked past Caliph to Lysandra. "Oh, you're the queen. You're tall. Sorry, that was rude. Ethan gets that from me, the saying things without thinking part." "I told you everyone here was tall," Ethan said triumphantly. "You were right, buddy. You were very right." James set Ethan down and attempted to straighten his clothes, which was a lost cause. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the unannounced arrival, and for the vessel, and probably for existing at all, based on what Caliph told me about Velari attitudes toward humans. But I had to come. When Caliph took the kids to meet you, I thought I could handle staying behind. I lasted 5 days before I realized I couldn't let her face this alone." "Face what exactly?" Lysandra asked. "Judgment, rejection. Whatever consequences come from loving someone you weren't supposed to love." James looked directly at her, and despite his obvious fear, his voice was steady. "I know what I am by your standards, a primitive, a genetic contamination. The person who derailed your daughter's destiny. But those 2 kids, they're the best thing I've ever done. And Caliph she's everything. So if you need to arrest someone or pass judgment or whatever happens in situations like this, I'm here. Judge me, I can take it." "Papa did his brave speech," Myra whispered to Ethan. "He practiced it the whole flight here," Ethan whispered back. "I heard that," James said. "And I did not practice. It was heartfelt and spontaneous." "You practiced in front of the bathroom mirror for an hour. 20 minutes tops." Torvin was grinning openly now. "I like him, he's ridiculous. Can we keep him?" "He's not a pet, Torvin," Lysandra said, but she felt something shifting inside her. This man had crossed impossible distances in an impossible ship for love, had raised her grandchildren, had given her daughter the happiness she'd been mourning for over 2 decades. "Dr. Rivera," she said formally, and watched him straighten nervously. "You're correct about Velari attitudes toward other species. We have very strict beliefs about genetic purity, about maintaining bloodlines, about the proper order of things." She paused. "But I have also spent 23 years without my daughter, and I have just discovered I have 2 grandchildren who are brilliant and strange and absolutely nothing like any children I've ever met. So perhaps our beliefs need examination." "Does that mean I'm not arrested?" "It means you're here now, and we're going to figure this out together. All of us." Lysandra looked at Caliph, who had tears in her eyes. "Also, your ship is an abomination and cannot possibly be safe to fly home. We'll need to provide you with proper transportation. Our engineers are going to want to study that thing," Torvin added. "Mostly to understand how it didn't explode." "It almost exploded," James said cheerfully. "Several times, but I'm an optimist." Ethan tugged on Lysandra's robe. "Grandma, does this mean Papa can stay? Because he promised to teach me about constellations from space, and you can see way more stars from here." Lysandra looked down at her grandson. her half-human grandson with his father's curiosity and his mother's determination, and felt something in her chest finally start to heal. "Yes," she said, "he can stay." The High Council chamber buzzed with tension 3 days after James Rivera's arrival. Lysandra sat at the head of the crescent-shaped table, acutely aware that every decision she made in the next hour would ripple through Velari society for generations. The council members had positioned themselves like chess pieces, Sarath and the traditionalists on one side, a smaller group of younger advisors on the other, and Torvin floating somewhere in the middle with his usual strategic ambiguity. "The law is clear," Sarath said for the 14th time. "Princess Kalith has violated the Genetic Preservation Act. The children, while innocent in this matter, cannot be recognized as legitimate heirs to the throne. We propose that the princess formally renounce her claim and live in," he paused delicately, "comfortable exile on Earth with her family." "Comfortable exile," Kalith repeated from where she stood beside Lysandra. "That's a creative way of saying banishment. We're not trying to punish you, princess. We're attempting to preserve 3,000 years of genetic stagnation." Torvin interrupted, looking up from the data tablet he'd been studying. "Because I've been reviewing the medical records from the past millennium, and they're fascinating. Birth rates declining, genetic disorders increasing. The very thing we were trying to prevent by maintaining purity is happening anyway because we've been playing with a limited deck." That's an oversimplification. It's actually an undersimplification. The full report is 87 pages, and it gets worse. Torvin stood up, projecting a holographic chart into the center of the table. "We've been so focused on keeping our bloodlines pure that we never noticed we were slowly dying out. The Velari population has dropped 18% in the last 500 years. The room went silent. Even Sarath looked unsettled. "The children," a younger advisor named Kyriel spoke up hesitantly, "have you had them medically evaluated?" "Extensively," Lysandra said. "The results arrived this morning." She activated her own display, showing a cascade of genetic data. "Myra and Ethan have hybrid vigor. Their immune systems are stronger than pure Velari children. Their cognitive development is accelerated. Myra demonstrated a telepathic range that exceeds adult capabilities, and Ethan appears to have perfect recall of anything he's ever seen or heard. They're also exhausting," James added from where he sat awkwardly in a chair designed for someone 8 inches taller. "Last night Ethan recited the entire periodic table at 3 in the morning because he couldn't sleep, including the elements we don't have on Earth, which was impressive but also deeply concerning from a parenting perspective." "He got that from you," Kalith muttered. "He absolutely got that from me." "This still doesn't address the fundamental issue," Sarath pressed. "Our laws are traditions. Were written by people who never imagined this situation." Lysandra cut him off. "By people who never met a human, never saw what possibility looks like." She stood, and the room automatically quieted. "I've spent 3 days with my grandchildren. Myra showed me how humans play chess, and then beat me in 6 moves. Ethan asked me 47 questions about quantum mechanics, and when I couldn't answer 3 of them, he and his father worked out the solutions together. They're children, but they're also something new, something that maybe we need. Your Majesty, with respect, you're allowing emotion to cloud. I buried my daughter 23 years ago, Sarath. In my heart I held a funeral. I mourned. And then 3 days ago she came back with proof that love doesn't care about our laws." Lysandra's voice was steel. "I will not lose her again. I will not lose them." "Then what do you propose?" Kyriel asked. "The law must be satisfied somehow." "Change the law." The room erupted. Voices overlapped, some outraged, some excited, all chaotic. Torvin let it go for exactly 30 seconds before raising his hand for silence. "Actually, there's precedent," he said, looking far too pleased with himself. "It took me 2 days of digging through archives, but I found it. 3,000 years ago, when the Genetic Preservation Act was ratified, there was a provision. An escape clause, if you will. He pulled up ancient text, the characters so old they required translation overlays. In circumstances where the introduction of external genetic material demonstrably strengthens the Velari people, the High Council may grant a dispensation. It was meant for medical emergencies, but the wording is, he grinned, conveniently vague. You're suggesting we claim this is a medical emergency? Sarath looked apoplectic. I'm suggesting that our declining population is an emergency, and these children represent a potential solution. Not the only solution, mind you, but a data point we'd be foolish to ignore. Torvin looked around the table. We can either cling to tradition and watch our species slowly fade, or we can adapt. Adaptation is what we do. It's what made us survive the first landing. It's what built this palace. Being Velari isn't about genetic purity. It's about being smart enough to evolve. This is insane, someone muttered. This is necessary, Kyriel countered. Counselor Torvin is right. We can't ignore the data. The debate raged for another hour. Lysandra let it happen, watching her advisors wrestle with centuries of belief against the cold logic of survival. Finally, she called for a vote. It wasn't unanimous. Sarath and two others dissented strongly. But it was enough. The council agreed to grant Calith a formal dispensation, recognizing Myra and Ethan as legitimate members of the royal family, with the understanding that their genetic profiles would be studied to help address Velari population decline. When the session ended and the council filed out, Lysandra found herself alone with her family. Calith looked exhausted but relieved. James looked like he'd survived a natural disaster. The children were in the corner playing some kind of hand game they'd invented. "Thank you," Calith said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. You're still princess, which means you have responsibilities, duties. The diplomatic service will want you back. Can I negotiate for Earth? Someone should advocate for them in Velari space." "That's actually a brilliant idea," Lysandra smiled. "Though you'll need to teach us about this coffee substance first. Torvin won't stop talking about it." "It's really good, Grandma," Myra piped up. "Papa adds too much sugar, but it makes him focus." "I add a normal amount of sugar," James protested. "You add 4 spoonfuls. That's normal. That's diabetes waiting to happen." Lysandra laughed, really laughed, for the first time in decades. She moved to the window, looking out at the crystalline spires and the ships moving through orbit. Earth was out there somewhere, a tiny blue dot she'd never paid attention to before. Now it was the place her daughter had chosen. The place her grandchildren called home. "Will you stay?" she asked, "at least for a while." "We have to go back eventually," Calith said, coming to stand beside her. "James has students, the kids have school, we have a life there." She paused. "But we'll visit, often, and maybe you could visit us sometime, see Earth, meet James's family, try pizza." "What's pizza?" "Another revelation," James said. "Like coffee but in food form." Ethan appeared at Lysandra's side, tugging her robe. "Can you tell us stories about Mama when she was little? Papa tells the best stories, but he doesn't know any about her before Earth." Lysandra looked down at her grandson, this impossible, wonderful child who shouldn't exist according to every law her people had written, and felt the last piece of grief finally release its grip on her heart. "I have hundreds of stories," she said, kneeling down to his level. "But they'll take many visits to tell them all." "Then we'll come back lots," Myra said decisively, "because stories are important." Outside, the 3 suns set in sequence, painting the sky in colors that had no human names. Inside, a family that spanned 2 species and defied 3,000 years of law settled in to share the first of many dinners together. Evolution, Lysandra thought, came in unexpected forms. Sometimes it came in starships and genetic codes, and sometimes it came in the form of 2 children asking endless questions and a man who crossed the stars for love. She decided she preferred the second kind.